In this one, I'm going to be upgrading a 7-year-old Django project from Django 1.6 to Django 3.2. Now, the reason I'm doing this is to show you how simple it is to upgrade Django, one, and number two, maybe some strategies on how to do it. But then finally, the main reason is to show you that Django is Django. A lot of the core components have been the same since Django 1.6 and before. There are some major things that have changed, certainly, but as you'll see, they won't have a huge impact on the things that we're trying to do here. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm first going to go ahead and clone the project. So I'm going to clone it to a folder that I just call that's dev. We'll just do git clone and then that actual folder, and then we'll cd into launch with code. Now I'm using VS Code here, so I can actually type out code period. I have the command line installed for VS Code, and this will just open it up into VS Code, which is really nice. Of course, you could do it the manual way if you need. Okay, so with any project, any Python project, if I'm grabbing somebody else's code or even my old crappy code, as we'll see here, look for requirements.txt or some sort of requirements file, even if it's a pipenv file. That's another one that's available as well, but typically you'll see a requirements.txt file. And what we see in here is Django 1.6.5 and something weird called south. So there's certainly other items in here that may or may not work with what we're trying to do. But since there is a requirements.txt file, and I know this is an old version of Django, I'm going to go ahead and create a virtual environment to start. Now, I also know that Django used to work really well with Python 2. And so there's a really good chance that this is using Python 2. Now, I could actually look up all the references for it, or I could even create a virtual environment and attempt to do it there, which I already know how to create the virtual environment for it. So that's actually what I'll end up doing by using virtual env. So virtual env, we can actually declare the version of Python we want to use. Now, before I do that, I will say, hey, look, Python 2.6 or 2.7 is actually on my machine. Python 3.6 is also on my machine. These are really the two I'm going to be using for this. But with virtual environment, I'll go ahead and just call virtual env -p and then Python and period. Now, the reason I can't use venv is because it's not built into Python 2.7. I think it came into Python 3.4. I don't know for sure, but when we actually use Python 3.6, we'll see the different virtual environment manager there. Okay, so if you don't have virtual env installed, what you do is just do pip install virtual env, and that should install it on your system. Now, if you're using your global, you might have to do sudo and then install virtual env that way, so you can actually create a virtual environment. This is true if you're using Python 2 on any system. And if you are using Python 2 on Windows, you might have to do pip this way, pip install virtual env. Cool. And I also have really old videos that show you how to install virtual env as well, because it's something I used to use all the time. Okay, so let's go ahead and activate our virtual environment. Of course, if you're on Mac, it's going to be source bin/activate. If you're on Windows, it's script/activate like that, spelled correctly with no space there. This is Mac or Linux, that I should have said. Okay, so now I'm just going to go pip install-r requirements.txt. Now, my goal with this is to see which packages might be out of date, which packages should I just remove from requirements.txt. In this case, it looks like Postgres is something I should remove, right? So Postgres, it's looking for Postgres. That is, I'm almost certain, only for production. Now, I'm going to verify this because I know Django well enough to verify the settings itself. Now, if you don't know Django well enough, the easiest way to navigate to where the Django configuration or settings are is usually in manage.py. It's going to have something like this. Now, this has been true for a very long time. And so this will likely be the project name .settings, settings being a Python file or module. So if we look into lwc.settings, we see lwc here and settings. I see a module, a actual folder called settings with init, base, and production and all that. So looking into production, as in this is on a live host server and all that, if I look for, I've got the database stuff here. So I actually don't have very many things that show me exactly what this is, but given that it's DJ database URL, and also given that there's a proc file here, this was likely on Heroku, which would have been a PostgreSQL database, which means I don't actually need that package here. And also static and WSGI ref, I probably don't need those either. If Django needs it or if South needs it, it will install it later. Okay, so with that out, I'm going to go ahead and run the requirements. Now, I'm not going to touch the settings yet because, well, I just want to see if I can even install the packages. It looks like I can. With those packages installed, let's now run the Python manage.py run server command. And this has been the same command for a really, really long time, as you see. But of course, I get this error here, cannot find the database, right? So again, I just deleted the Postgres package from requirements, and my intuition is this is made for production. So the actual staging or the development file is not in there, as we could verify by going into settings into init. Now, I'm sure in the series itself, I talked about it's important to separate your development environment from your production environment, and this is a good example of that. It actually makes me happy to know that even 7 years ago, I talked about these things a lot because getting into production is such a fun thing to do. But I'm actually not going to be using this settings module at all. I think, kind of complicates things a little bit. So I'm just going to rename this to settings older. And then I did see that there was this settings _ old.py. So I'm actually going to go ahead and use this one, assuming that it is essentially what the local development settings should be. I'm not sure if it is, but we'll go ahead and give it a shot. So I'm going to close out this error with Control-C, press up and run server again, and we'll jump in there. And what do you know? Hello world. So clearly that is an old iPhone and it's showing Swift. This is probably around the time where I was experimenting a little bit with Swift and iOS. But things have changed since. That's 7 years ago. It's crazy to think that Swift has been around that long. But the idea here is we now have it running, right? And if I go into the admin, hopefully I see that I have something for the admin, but as of now, I don't see anything. So maybe I need the trailing slash. Sure enough, I do. Here's the old admin. Let's actually make a super user here. So I'm going to go ahead and do Python manage.py, create super user. And I've got no such table. So I'm going to run Python manage.py and hit enter. I want to see all of the commands that are available to me. Okay, so what I see here is a bunch of South commands. Now, what you're probably not familiar with if you haven't used Django as long as I have is South. South is the old version of migrating Django tables. So it was just like when you made changes to models. So in here, we go to models.py. If you make changes in the future, you have to run make migrations and migrate. That's the current practice. But back then, you had to use South for it. And here are all of the South commands that you would have had to do. And I actually don't remember exactly what, I think it was first migrate and then syncdb. Or maybe a start migration. I don't actually remember what the commands were because I haven't used it in, well, since probably Django 1.8, so 5 or 6 years. So let's go ahead and just try Python manage.py migrate. And again, I get this other command problem here. So I'm going to go ahead and run Python manage.py syncdb. This is the old version of migrate as I remember it. And then I'll go ahead and say, yes, it's asking me for a super user. I'm just going to use CFE and a whatever password because it's a development environment. There we go. So now we have made the migrations. So what I did with syncdb was the same thing as Python manage.py make migrations, what that is to this day. And now I can run Python manage.py migrate to make all of those changes, which is still how it works. Syncdb sounds a little bit more like, hey, we're going to sync our models with the database. And that's probably how I used to remember it anyway. But now we actually have all of that stuff. So let's go ahead and run this server again. And let's take a look at this old school, admin right here. And I think it's still the same password. Sure enough, here it is. And it looks pretty much the same as it does today. I mean, there's definitely been some upgrades and changes since then, some good ones, but it's pretty cool to see. So I'm going to go ahead and try and put an email in. And there you go. Sure enough, It's working, and it even has a reference file here, which probably means that it's going to track other ones. So I'll go ahead and say another@gmail.com, hit enter, and sure enough, that works too. This actually isn't too bad. I'm actually kind of surprised on how this looks. And what do you know? It's actually tracking the number that's in there. So this is, obviously going to reward you. And this user has referred one person. Pretty cool. I mean, still fairly practical, I think. Looks like it's got the IP address even. Look at that. Cool. So that is the actual project, and it's actually running. So now it's time to just rip the Band-Aid and upgrade it to Django 3.2. Okay, so I'm going to go and close this out, clear this out, and I'm going to go ahead and deactivate this virtual environment. And I'm going to go ahead and remove rf bin include lib. Okay, and I'm going to clear it out. Notice that I didn't remove the database, right? The database is still there. The database integrity is still there. Okay, so the reason I got rid of that virtual environment is because now I want to use Python 3.6 because Python 2 is old and terrible. We want to use Python 3.6 and above. Eventually, Python 3.6 will be old and terrible. But Python 3.6 and hit enter. It's not actually terrible. I'm totally kidding. It's just we want to use Python 3. Okay, cool. So now that I've got that, source bin / activate. And so going back into my requirements here, what are the things that I actually need? Well, certainly not south. We definitely don't need south anymore. But now what I want is 3.2. So what I'm going to do here is 3.2.0, comma, less than 3.3.0. Okay, so all this is doing is getting me the latest version of 3.2, but not going higher than 3.3, right? So if I cut that out, that would always go higher than 3.2. So the latest of the latest, but I want to get it in between there. And, that's probably true for this. DJ static, I have no idea if I even need that. Probably not. And also GUnicorn. So if I get rid of the equals, it's just going to install the latest version and hopefully doesn't conflict with the other version that's in there. So now I'm going to go ahead and do pip install -r requirements.txt. So this is now going to give me, I got the equals incorrect. Just like that. There we go. So let's try that again. And so now this is going to give me the latest version of Django, right? So Django 3.2 and then all of these other potential dependencies. And notice that it's actually giving me even more than that. Okay, so now that we've got this, I know for sure this will not run. So Python manage.py run server, it's going to give me an error. First off is the template directory. Okay, so you might be like, well, how am I going to solve this? Well, all it's doing is improperly configured. So the configuration itself is in settings.py. So I know it's in here, and I know that this has changed over time. I know generally what's happened, but it's like, why even remember specifically what's happened, like how this all looks with the newest version of Django? I don't recommend you do that. Instead, what I recommend is we jump back into our command line here, and let's go ahead and do DJ32 and cd into DJ32 and just make an absolute blank project with roughly the exact same settings. So Python 3.6, venv, and then what we're going to do is install that same version of Django. So all of this right here. So we'll do pip install and then all of that, put it in a string like that. That way it actually knows how to install it. Now this is always going to work for you. So if you're watching this in several months when a newer version of 3.2 comes out, you will get that newer version. So this is just a quick and easy way to make sure that you are using that newer version. And I actually made a mistake. I didn't actually activate the virtual environment. So we're going to want to do that again. So it's actually in the virtual environment. I just installed it on my system, which is not something I particularly needed to do. And that would also be true with any of these other settings. But from my experience, these things don't really make a big impact on my actual code itself, at least not yet. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and now do Django-admin and start project, and we'll just call it DJ32. And we'll cd, or let's just do code, and we'll take a look at that project. So opening this one up, what we should see here is in DJ32, let's just go into settings. Now, first and foremost, we have a different way of writing our base directory by using pathlib. We don't have to use pathlib. I know that for sure. But what I want to check is something like middleware. Here's our middleware actual setup. So let's go back into our other settings, our original project, right? So I could actually probably put these side by side and just really scroll down each one. But on the video, it's not going to look great. So I'm just going to go off of what I know for sure that we're going to need to change, but see middleware classes, middleware, right? They just got rid of classes. And there is also a lot of Django documentation for this, right? So all of the Django docs will show you these migrations and what you need to do. And it's certainly possible that everything that's in this new one needs to be there. I see that this doesn't start with Django, so I assume that it's custom. So I'm going to go ahead and put in all of the new Django ones. That just covers me, essentially. Now, of course, if I had specific ones that I wanted to keep in there, I could do that. But I think these are all going to be overridden and added additional security middleware. Yeah, it looks like maybe that's the only new thing that's being added, which we could check with Git. I'm just not going to worry about that right now, or the version control, right? Okay, so next is we see this WGI application. Looks like that's the same. I got a templates actual configuration, which I know is different. I'll go ahead and copy that and look for my templates DIRs. This was one of those major changes that Django made. I think maybe in 2.0. Anyways, so there we now change where the template directory is. I'm gonna go ahead and get rid of that. And I'm also gonna get rid of the template debug up here, which actually, let's leave it in for a moment. And now that I've made these settings changes, I think that's the only changes I really needed to make. Notice that the settings is no longer there, but now it's saying no module name south. Okay, so this is from a few things. Number one, the installed apps. Okay, so we've got that. And then now I'm getting a positional on delete missing. So this is a newer version of Django. I think, again, Django 2.0 came out with, hey, some places need positional arguments of on delete. Now, I already know this exactly where it needs to go, but it is telling you, right? So line 8 in models.py. Line 8. So technically line 7. And I don't know why I did that slash there, but anyway, so we've got a foreign key here. So now foreign keys, you have to declare what they do. So on delete, when they are deleted, and it's models. In this case, I'll just say set null because they allow null to be true. So basically when the related item is deleted, what do? That's what happens. That's it. Okay, so now I've got another error and I've got cannot import name patterns. So I'm going to go into URLs. Okay, so this is an older way of doing URLs, which we could actually verify by going into this code again. So in urls.py, notice that this patterns is non-existent. Okay, so let's go ahead and get rid of that and actually turn it into a list just like that one. Okay, so just get rid of this. It had an empty string anyway, so not something we needed to worry about. So I no longer need to import it, nor can I really. Include is another one that we probably don't need for the admin itself. So admin.site.urls is no longer include. Include can still be used like this, but we don't actually need to do it here. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that include. And that probably handles it to some degree, except path. Path is a little bit different. I see that it says URL. So it should be from Django.urls import RE path, which is the regular expression path. And we can set that as URL or just altogether get rid of URL and place these in here. Now, this is something that's, again, newer to Django, but it's another one of those things that I remember very specifically when that happened. So it's really easy for me to remember that those few minor changes. And so like I really just went through some of the major changes that have happened. There's one more major change that we'll do in a minute, but I really went through the major changes that happened in the last 7 years. Okay, so there we go. So let's go ahead and give this a shot. Run server again. And so now it's giving me, it must be a callable or list/tuple in the case of include. Okay, so what does it mean by a callable? Now the views itself, as we see, there's a string here. So you used to be able to reference a view as a string. Now you actually have to import that view. I don't think this is actually that major, but it does make sense. So we'll go ahead and do from joins, import views as join. I'll do joins views. I don't actually love doing it this method, but I'll do it first and then show you the method I like doing. So we now just use joins.home or joinviews.home and then joinviews.share. Ooh, that's a fun view name. It's not a good view name. Okay, so anyways, so this is actually not the import I like doing. Instead, I like importing the actual views themselves. So from joins.views, import home as home view and share as share view. So this is, I think, a little bit better and a little bit more descriptive as to what these things are and maybe more accurately describing how these views should be anyway. Okay, cool. Because share as a function could be all sorts of functions. It doesn't have to just be that. Great. So that's it for the views, I think, or the URLs, I think. And there we go. So yeah, that's it for the URLs. But now we've got these migration problems, right? So south migrations in here. Module not found south. And we can see this by the file or the folder migrations. So what we want to do is actually delete all of that. We want to delete all of this south migrations. Now, there's certainly a more standardized way of changing over the migrations without just deleting them altogether. But I'm going to go ahead and delete them just to make things a little bit easier on me. So in Launch with Code, I'm going to look for that folder of migrations, and I'm literally just going to put them in as a list here and delete everything except for init. So except for init py. There we go. And now I'll go ahead and run python manage.py, make migrations, and then python manage.py migrate. Okay, so I already have this table existing, right? So here is one of those issues or errors that would occur if you're just deleting a bunch of migrated tables and databases and all that stuff. That is certainly a challenge. So what we could do is we could potentially do migrate fake and then try to run this, right? And so that's certainly a potential. It looks like I have another error here that's not necessarily related to migrations, but that's kind of nice to see, right? We actually have a way to run this. Now, what I am seeing is I think there's a middleware error with the middleware that we have. So I'm gonna go ahead and get rid of that. Once I get rid of that, it looks like I can actually run a lot of the things that are in here. Now, of course, I got a template syntax error. Static files is not a registered tag library. So let's go ahead and do a quick search for static files. So yet another thing that has changed only slightly. It's just simply static now. It's no longer load static files. So just simply static, which is really, really easy to change. And that might solve all of that. Cool. So again, I'll go ahead and add in a new email in here. And again, join number is 1. So it's certainly possible that all of this is still working with the database. So if we go into the admin now with that trailing slash, log in, notice Django admin has changed. We go to joins, and sure enough, everything is there. Everyone's there, and we're looking good. So that's pretty much it. I mean, there are other things that I would probably want to go through, make some changes to, and also maybe fix my custom middleware, right? So there's this custom middleware right here that wasn't working correctly. So to do that, I would just do Django custom middleware and maybe 3.2, right? So we go into the documentation for it, and we've got a single middleware class here, right? So process request is kind of what I'm looking for here. And let's see, process view, might be process view now. I haven't done one of these custom middleware in a little while. And yeah, so it looks like this is something that, here we go. So upgrading pre-Django 110 style middleware. So calls self.process request. Yeah, so it looks like it's going to be maybe slightly different of a middleware class itself. And so really we could just kind of get the sample middleware, right? So the response, the request, here's these are all request related things. So let's go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and grab this right here. And we'll just say class refer middleware. And it doesn't take any arguments as before. And then the request itself, for each request response after the view is called. And so there we go. Looks like that should be generally okay, maybe. Oh, I got the incorrect tabs and spaces here. And it looks like it's because of settings that I have for VS Code. And we'll just grab this and tab size and convert indentation to spaces. Save that one. And let's go back into our settings here. Let's bring back our middleware. Let's see if that's working now. Sure enough, it is. Okay, great. So it still has warnings, things that we might need to change over time. But for now, it looks like we have something that is working. So let's jump back in and let's share this. I'm going to go into another tab and we'll do ABC123 4 or whatever at gmail.com. Run it. Looks like we should be okay. Let's go back into our other one, refresh in here, and it looks like I got a join number of 2. Okay, great. So of course I could check out the whole process there as far as like if that middleware is actually working correctly and all that. And that middleware is not very efficient, to be honest. So it's cool that we could just quickly change it like that. I don't actually use middleware like this anymore. Like I'm not doing lookups every single time I use middleware, especially not how this is done, right? This would probably be better if we at least had if this is not none before I attempt to do anything else. Because if it is none, we should not even go there. But anyway, so there's definitely some other changes that we can make here. And again, this is a really, really simple project, but there's not a whole lot that I needed to change. And this has been true for a while now. So if we break it down, settings had quite a few changes, right? Number one, the base directory did change exactly how settings actually is, right? So it now uses path lib, which I think is actually far superior to OS path, but OS path still works. Secret key, same thing. Still would need to change it, all that. Debug, we would probably need to change that. Template debug, it's not really giving us a warning, or at least I don't see any warnings for it. But we actually don't need template debug at all. Maybe older versions of Django would still give you a warning. Allowed hosts is still allowed hosts. That hasn't changed. Installed apps, same. Middleware, just changed the name. It was middleware classes, now it's just middleware. Root URL conf, same. The configuration for URLs, WSGI configuration, same. Databases, same. Obviously, there might be some configuration differences with databases because databases do change and other ones are improved or added to Django. Language code, same. Time zone, same. All of these things are the same. Share URL, that's a configuration that I clearly did with this project in particular. Templates, that changed. That added a few additional things like context processors. I don't think I have context processors on here otherwise. At least I don't think so. Let's go ahead and just do a quick search for it. And it looks like no. I think these context processors for templates were there by default. Now we actually see them and we can change them on demand. We can change app directories. We can also add debug and stuff like that in there. Or template debug, which is on by default. Static directories, all that stuff, none of that's changed. Media root, that hasn't changed. right? So a lot of these things are almost identical from 7 years ago. URLs certainly changed a lot. I think URLs are a lot cleaner now. It's a lot easier to work with. And the fact that there's regular expression paths and just Django paths, which have some dynamicness to them as well, which you could check out, try Django for that. Our views have barely changed at all. I think the main thing is just generally how you would actually have your views. And so like if we look at joins, let's take a look at joins. Right. So like a number of things that I did here that I probably wouldn't do today, which I've just learned, I've got better practices and all that, is where these functions exist. These would be utility functions and they would exist somewhere else, most likely. And then also this try block, how I did this is also something else that I would change. But the general idea is the functionality hasn't changed that much. It's actually been roughly the same. It's still Django, still core Django. So I realize this is probably a little tedious for some of you. For others of you, I just like breezed through this thing. It was way too fast. But the general idea was to show you that even a 7-year-old version of Django can still be updated today, and a lot of the core features of it are still the same. While also telling you that if you are watching a tutorial or reading a book that's older, you're going to run into errors that are just small, silly little things that have changed over time, version to version, but they're going to really stop you in your tracks, like the templates thing, right? So what if you were watching a older version of Django, so Django 1.11, and you were trying to do the templates for Django 3.2? You could probably figure it out, and probably pretty easily, but that's not really the key here. The key is that you would be incredibly frustrated trying to figure out why your templates looks different than the videos. And as you've seen, the actual versions don't actually make that much of a difference when it comes to learning. Now, when you're going into production and you want actual users using this, absolutely use the latest LTS and the greatest security measures that you can, which is another reason why I wanted to introduce you to this right here. This is a clean and easy way to do that for LTSs. And if you're not familiar with where the LTS is or the long-term support is, you can just go to djangoproject.com under download, and you can just search for the LTS, right? Supported versions right here. So 2.2 LTS is going to be supported into 2022. We're not in 2022 yet. We're in 2021 at the time of this recording. But if you watch it in 2022, 2.2 still works. I just did 3.2, which will work until 2024, but you'll probably be able to learn from it until like 2028. Maybe not that long, but 7 years ago, Django 1.6. I mean, it's crazy to me to look at this code and be like, oh, well, my habits weren't great, but this is still valid today. Like, it works, right? It's not the most efficient. It's not the cleanest, but I'm still using Django forms. These are model forms. In this case, it's a model form right here. Look, it's like roughly still a lot of the things I still teach to this day, just using better practices. But I think it's pretty cool that we're able to see the evolution of Django, but also the history of Django in today's code as well. So thanks so much for watching. Hopefully you got something out of this. And let me know if you want to see more of these things, or if you want to see how I would actually adjust this code to make it a little bit better even for today, or if there's another project you want me to upgrade, just to give it a shot. Right? I'm not going to upgrade a project that would take 3 or 4 hours on a video, which some of them certainly could. So yeah, thanks again for watching. My name is Justin, and I'll see you next time.